My sister took my 5-year-old daughter to buy a birthday gift and came back alone. Oops, she smirked, sipping her mimosa. I left her at Target. My mother actually laughed. Good, she said, crossing her legs. She was getting way too much attention anyway. They abandoned my little girl in a massive store simply because our billionaire grandfather called her his favorite. I did not scream. I made exactly one phone call to Grandpa Marcus. 30 minutes later, my sister was sobbing on the floor and my mother had lost all color in her face. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who pushed you too far. My name is Chloe, and I am 33 years old. To my family, I am just a boring desk worker, a single mother who supposedly ruins their aesthetic. To Wall Street, I am a senior executive at a major hedge fund. But on this particular Sunday afternoon, I was just a panicked mother tearing through my mother Patricia and her pristine white living room. We were supposed to be celebrating the upcoming vow renewal of my older sister Sienna and her husband Trevor. The house was filled with expensive floral arrangements and catered appetizers. I had been in the kitchen helping the staff when Sienna returned from her shopping trip. "Where is Maya?" I asked, checking behind the heavy oak front door. I checked the foyer, the hallway, and the formal dining room. Panic started to rise in my chest. "Sienna, where is my daughter?" Sienna was lounging on the custom velvet sofa, adjusting her designer sunglasses on top of her head. She casually swirled the orange liquid in her crystal glass and took a long sip. She did not even look at me when she spoke. "Oops," she said, her voice dripping with absolute indifference. "I left her at Target." The room stopped. The ambient music playing from the hidden speakers seemed to fade away. I stared at my 35-year-old sister, waiting for the punchline. Sienna was always vain, always obsessed with her social media image and her status as the golden child, but surely she was joking. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "Where is Maya? I told you." Sienna sighed, rolling her eyes as if I were the one being unreasonable. "I left her at the store." She kept wandering off toward the toy aisle while I was trying to match the exact shade of ivory for my table linens. She was being annoying and whiny. I told her to wait right there, and then I just left. She needs to learn that the world does not revolve around her. "You left a 5-year-old child alone in a public place." I shouted, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Are you out of your mind? Do not raise your voice in my house, Chloe." "My mother," Patricia snapped. She walked into the living room, smoothing her expensive silk blouse. Patricia was 58, obsessed with high society, and completely dedicated to keeping Sienna happy. "Mom, she left Maya at Target," I pleaded, expecting my mother to immediately share my terror. Instead, Patricia let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Good," she said. "The child needs a lesson in independence. Grandpa Marcus spoils her rotten." Ever since he called Maya his favorite grandchild at Thanksgiving, she has been entirely too full of herself. She was getting way too much attention, pulling focus from Sienna and her special week. A few hours at customer service will teach her some humility. I felt physically sick. My own mother and sister were punishing a 5-year-old child out of pure, unadulterated jealousy. Grandpa Marcus was a self-made African-American billionaire who saw right through Sienna and her shallow lifestyle. He loved Maya because she was genuine and kind. For that, my family had deliberately abandoned her. I turned to grab my purse from the entryway table, my hands shaking so violently I knocked over a silver picture frame. It shattered on the marble floor. "Whoa, calm down," a voice boomed from the doorway. Trevor, the 38-year-old husband of my sister, stepped into the room. He was a pretentious white man who constantly dropped subtle racial microaggressions while pretending to be the ultimate ally. He viewed marrying into our wealthy black family as his personal achievement. "Stop acting like an angry black woman, Chloe," Trevor sneered, stepping carefully over the broken glass. "You are making a massive scene over nothing. Your kid is fine. Target has security cameras everywhere. You are ruining the vibe of Sienna and her big day." Why do you always have to be so aggressive and loud? I looked at the three of them. Sienna sipping her drink. Patricia nodding in agreement with her son-in-law. Trevor believing his whiteness and his marriage to the golden child made him untouchable. They thought they held all the power. They thought I was the quiet, struggling single mother. They thought they could treat my daughter like garbage and I would swallow the disrespect to keep the peace. I did not waste another breath trying to appeal to the basic human decency they clearly lacked. I turned and bolted out the front door. I sprinted down the driveway toward my car, my mind racing with terrifying images of Maya lost and crying in a crowded store. Before I pulled the car door open, I glanced back through the massive window. Sienna was not calling the store. She was not showing any remorse. She had her phone held high in the air, smiling brightly, taking a selfie for her followers. She thought she had won. She had no idea what was about to happen next. The war had just officially begun, right then and right there. Now. The tires of my sedan screeched against the asphalt as I pulled into the Target parking lot. I did not bother finding a proper space. I shoved the gear shift into park right in the fire lane, threw my hazard lights on, and sprinted toward the glowing red entrance. My chest burned with every breath. My mind conjured 100 horrifying scenarios of what could happen to a 5-year-old girl wandering alone in a massive retail store. I shoved past a group of teenagers loitering by the automatic doors and ran straight for the customer service desk. Before I could even shout my daughter's name, I saw her. Maya was sitting on a plastic chair inside the glass-walled security office, clutching a half-eaten lollipop and looking completely terrified. 2 store security guards and a uniformed police officer were standing nearby. Maya. I screamed her name, my voice cracking under the weight of pure terror. She dropped the candy and ran toward me. I dropped to my knees on the hard linoleum floor and caught her in my arms, pulling her small body tightly against my chest. I buried my face in her braids, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo, letting the tears fall freely now that she was safe. She was shaking her tiny hands, gripping the back of my shirt, as she buried her wet face into my neck. I held her for a long time, whispering that Mommy was here, that everything was going to be perfectly fine. When I finally stood up, keeping Maya securely resting on my hip, the police officer stepped forward. He was a tall, serious-looking man, holding a small notepad. He introduced himself as Officer Davis. "Are you the mother?" he asked, his tone professional, but carrying an undeniable edge of concern. "Yes, I am, Chloe," I replied, my voice steadying as the protective maternal instinct fully took over. My sister Sienna was supposed to be watching her. She came back to my mother's house and claimed Maya had simply wandered off while she was looking at table linens. I came as fast as I could. "I am so sorry for the trouble." Officer Davis exchanged a heavy look with the store security manager. Then he gestured for me to step further into the security office, away from the prying eyes of passing shoppers. "Ma'am, I am glad your daughter is safe. But we have a very serious situation here," Officer Davis said. "We reviewed the surveillance footage from the toy department and the front entrance to piece together how the child got separated from her aunt. I need you to understand that this was not an accident." My blood ran cold. The chaotic noise of the store around us seemed to fade into a dull hum. "What do you mean it was not an accident?" I asked. "She told us she lost track of her." The security manager clicked a mouse on his computer console and swiveled the monitor toward me. "I suggest you watch this for yourself," he said quietly. I stared at the screen. The grainy color footage showed aisle 14, the doll section. Sienna was walking down the aisle, her designer handbag slung over her arm, aggressively typing on her phone. Maya was trailing a few steps behind her, looking at a display of action figures. Then the video showed Sienna stopping. She turned around and looked directly at Maya. She pointed her manicured finger at a spot on the floor, clearly giving Maya a strict command to stay right there. Maya nodded obediently, staying perfectly still. Then my sister did the unthinkable. Sienna turned her back on my 5-year-old daughter and walked away. The camera angle switched to the main aisle. Sienna did not look panicked. She did not look around frantically for a missing child. She simply strolled toward the exit, checking her reflection in a display mirror as she passed. The final camera angle showed the parking lot. Sienna walked straight to her white Mercedes. Before opening the driver door, she looked directly up at the exterior security camera. She stared right into the lens, flashed a deliberate, mocking smile, and got into her car. She drove away, leaving my baby girl completely alone inside a massive store. I stopped breathing. The air was literally sucked out of my lungs. This was not a careless mistake made by a self-absorbed woman. This was a calculated, malicious act of cruelty. They had done this on purpose. Patricia and Trevor had probably known exactly what Sienna was planning. They wanted to punish a little girl just because she received a bit of affection from her great-grandfather. They wanted to break my spirit. Officer Davis gently cleared his throat, pulling my attention away from the frozen image of my sister's smiling face on the monitor. Because this was a deliberate act of abandonment, I am legally obligated to file a report for child endangerment. Officer Davis explained, his voice softening with sympathy as he saw the absolute shock on my face. I also have to notify Child Protective Services. They will need to open an investigation. I know you are the victim here, but they have to follow protocol when a minor is intentionally left behind by a family member. A fresh wave of horror washed over me. Child Protective Services. My sister's petty jealousy had just invited the government into my life. As a single black mother, having a CPS file opened against my family was a terrifying prospect. Trevor knew this. Patricia knew this. Sienna knew this. They were trying to destroy my life, strip away my child, and ruin everything I had built, all to maintain their toxic hierarchy. I thanked the officer, provided my contact information, and assured him I would cooperate fully with any investigation. I carried Maya out to the car, my mind operating with a terrifying new clarity. The sadness and confusion were completely gone. The lifelong desire to win my mother's approval evaporated into thin air. In their place was a cold, sharp, and unbreakable resolve. They had crossed the ultimate line. They went after my child. I strapped Maya safely into her booster seat, handing her a juice box from the console. I climbed into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and started the engine. Before putting the car in drive, I picked up my phone. I bypassed my contacts list and dialed a private unlisted number that very few people in the world had access to. The line rang exactly twice before a deep, commanding voice answered. "Grandpa Marcus," I said, staring blankly at the steering wheel, my voice entirely devoid of emotion. "It is time. Initiate Protocol 4 immediately." The drive back was absolute silence. Maya had fallen asleep in the back seat. My hands gripped the steering wheel with a terrifying calmness. The tears were gone. The panic had evaporated. In their place sat a cold, calculating rage. For 33 years I played the role of the dutiful, quiet daughter. I let them cast me as the family disappointment to be tolerated. I allowed them their delusions because it was easier than fighting. But they weaponized a 5-year-old child for their amusement. They crossed a boundary that could never be uncrossed. I parked far away from Sienna and her white Mercedes. I unbuckled my sleeping daughter, lifted her into my arms, and walked toward the double doors of the estate. I kicked the door open. The house echoed with sickening laughter. I walked toward the formal dining room, my boots echoing against the marble floors. Sienna and Trevor sat at the mahogany table surrounded by wedding magazines. Patricia stood behind them, admiring a floral centerpiece. They were loudly planning their lavish 5th anniversary vow renewal. Sienna gestured wildly with a platinum pen, her voice carrying its signature tone of unearned superiority. "We must secure the string quartet," Sienna demanded, tapping a contract. "I do not care if they charge an extra $5,000. We are already spending $50,000 on this event." Trevor leaned back, swirling his drink with a smug expression. "Just put it on the black card, babe. We cannot have your friends thinking we cut corners. Order the imported vintage." I stepped fully into the room, holding my sleeping child. The three of them froze. Sienna looked up, her eyes darting to Maya, genuine surprise crossing her face. She had not expected me so fast. "Oh, you found her," Sienna said. "I was just about to call the store. She ran off while I was paying. You must teach her not to wander away." I stared at her. I did not scream or cry. I just looked at the three of them sitting in their fake kingdom playing with money they did not earn. You do not need to worry about the string quartet, Sienna, I said calmly. The room went silent. Trevor let out a condescending laugh. Chloe, do not start with the dramatics right now. We are dealing with luxury vendors. Just take your kid upstairs and let us finish planning. I took a step closer, locking eyes with Trevor. I am not being dramatic. I am being entirely practical. You do not need to worry about the string quartet champagne or floral arrangements because you cannot pay for them. You have exactly $0. Patricia gasped. Chloe, how dare you speak to your brother-in-law that way? He and Sienna are hosting the event of the season. Trevor scoffed, pulling his smartphone from his pocket. Do not mind her, Patricia. She is just bitter because her life is a struggle. Watch this. I am transferring the $10,000 deposit to the planner right now. He tapped his screen with exaggerated movements, holding the phone up so I could see the payment gateway. He pressed confirm. We waited in absolute silence for exactly 3 seconds. A loud buzz emitted. The screen flashed bright red. Transaction declined. Insufficient funds. Trevor frowned, tapping the screen again. That is impossible. It is a glitch. He entered the details for a luxury credit card. He hit process. Another sharp buzz. Declined. Account frozen. The smug expression vanished from his face, replaced by panicked confusion. He tapped icons, trying to access checking accounts, savings, offshore investments. Everything was flashing the exact same message. Access denied. Sienna snatched her own phone from the table, her manicured fingers trembling as she opened her banking application. What is going on? She shrieked. My account says 0. Everything says 0. Trevor, did you do something? Trevor was sweating now, his face pale as he stared at the red warnings on his screen. I did not do anything. The bank must have flagged our accounts for fraud because of the large vendor payments. I will call the Platinum Concierge desk right now and get this sorted out. He put the phone to his ear, his foot tapping anxiously. I shifted Maya's weight in my arms, watching their empire crumble in real time. The Platinum Concierge cannot help you, Trevor, I said. No one at the bank can help you. Patricia marched around the table, her face twisted in fury. Chloe, what did you do? Did you hack into their accounts? Are you trying to ruin your sister's special week because you are jealous? You are acting completely insane. I ignored my mother and walked over to the antique credenza in the corner of the room. I carefully laid Maya down on the velvet cushion, covering her with my coat so she could continue sleeping. Then I turned back to face the room. I walked over to the mahogany dining table and pushed Sienna's wedding magazines onto the floor. They hit the marble with a heavy, satisfying thud. I reached into my bag and pulled out my laptop. Trevor was shouting into his phone, demanding to speak to a manager, demanding to know why a man of his status was being denied access to his money. Sienna was hyperventilating furiously, trying to log into different financial portals, her hands shaking so badly, she kept dropping her phone. I flipped my laptop open and typed in my passwords. The screen illuminated the dim room with a bright, crisp light. The bank did not freeze your accounts, Trevor, I announced, my voice cutting through his panicked shouting. Trevor lowered his phone, staring at me with absolute terror. What are you talking about? He demanded. I turned the laptop around so the screen faced the three of them. The display showed the master dashboard of the family's trust fund. Right at the top, my name was listed as the sole primary administrator. The silence was absolute. Sienna leaned forward, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows knitting together in sheer confusion. She squinted at the high-resolution screen, her brain clearly struggling to process the bold black letters spelling out my name. Trevor pushed past her, practically pressing his nose to the monitor. He read the title out loud, his voice wavering slightly. The Marcus Family Trust. Administrator Chloe Marcus. He looked up at me, a tight, nervous smile stretching across his face. Is this some kind of prank, Chloe? Did you create a fake website to get back at Sienna for a harmless mistake? Patricia crossed her arms over her chest, stepping up beside Trevor. Stop playing games, Chloe. You are a low-level paper pusher at some corporate office. You do not even make enough to buy a decent pair of shoes. Turn off this screen and apologize immediately. I closed the laptop and placed my hands flat on the mahogany table. I am not playing games, Mom. For the past 6 years, I have allowed all of you to believe I was just a basic desk worker because it was easier than dealing with your endless demands for money. I am the Director of Risk Management at Apex Holdings. I manage a portfolio worth over $2 billion. Grandpa Marcus brought me into the firm right after I finished my master's degree. He trained me, tested me, and officially made me the legal executor of his entire estate last month. I control every penny that flows into this family. Sienna let out a sharp gasp, stumbling backward in her heels until she hit the edge of the velvet sofa. You are lying to us. Grandpa Marcus would never ever give you control of the money. I am the oldest. I am the one carrying on the family aesthetic. He promised me that trust fund for my vow renewal. He did not promise you anything, Sienna. I corrected her, keeping my voice perfectly level. You simply assumed the money would always be there to fund your shallow lifestyle. But leaving a helpless 5-year-old child alone in a department store has consequences. As the sole administrator of the trust, I have the authority to freeze assets in the event of gross negligence or misconduct. I just officially froze your trust allowance, Sienna. I also froze your monthly stipends, Mom. Every credit card, every bank account tied to the Marcus estate is entirely locked. Trevor's pale face turned a highly dangerous shade of deep crimson. The calm, socially progressive persona he carefully maintained for his peers completely vanished. He slammed his heavy fist down hard on the table, making the crystal glasses rattle. You cannot do this. You have no legal right to touch our money. I am a partner at a top law firm. I have superior legal connections across this entire city. I will drag you through court so fast your head will spin. I will sue you for embezzlement fraud and emotional distress. No judge in this state is going to let an angry, bitter woman steal from a respectable family. You will be ruined, Chloe. I will make sure you never work in finance again. I looked directly at Trevor with total, unapologetic disgust. You absolutely do not have any superior legal connections in this city, Trevor. You have a massive mountain of hidden debt and a completely fake partnership at a wonderfully mediocre firm. If you want to take me to court, I welcome the challenge. My elite corporate lawyers will chew you up and spit you out before lunchtime. Patricia stepped right between us, her eyes blazing with a fury I had only ever seen directed only at me. You ungrateful little brat, she hissed, her voice vibrating with hatred. I gave you a roof over your head. I let you bring that child into my pristine home. And this is how you repay us, by ruining your sister's special week out of pure, ugly jealousy. You have always been jealous of Sienna. You have always tried to steal her joy. Patricia pointed a trembling finger toward the front door. You are dead to me, Chloe. Do you hear me? You are no longer my daughter. I am officially disowning you right here and right now. You are going to take your brat and you are going to get out of my house. I never want to see your face on this property again. If you ever try to contact us, I will have Trevor file a restraining order against you. You think you have power because of some piece of paper. You are nothing. You will always be nothing. Get out of my house before I call the police and have you forcibly removed for trespassing. The sheer volume of her shouting caused Maya to stir on the antique credenza. My little girl rubbed her eyes, looking around the tense room with sleepy confusion. I immediately walked over to her, wrapping my arms around her small shoulders and pulling her close to my chest. I did not want her to absorb any more of their toxic energy. I picked up my laptop and slipped it carefully into my leather bag. I grabbed Maya's small pink backpack from the floor and slung it over my shoulder. Trevor stood by the table, breathing heavily, trying to comfort a weeping Sienna. Patricia stood tall, her chest heaving, believing she had just won the ultimate victory by throwing me out onto the street. They genuinely thought this was the end of the punishment. They thought they could banish me and somehow regain access to their precious luxury funds by morning. I looked at the three of them standing amidst their ridiculous floral arrangements and overpriced wedding magazines. I felt a genuine, peaceful smile spread across my face. I adjusted my grip on my daughter's hand and looked directly into my mother's angry eyes. Enjoy the house, Mom, while you still can. The drive away from the estate was the quietest 20 minutes of my life. Maya fell asleep instantly, the gentle hum of the engine soothing her. I kept my eyes fixed on the long road ahead. My phone sat in the cup holder silent for exactly 14 minutes before the screen lit up. Then it started vibrating. It did not stop. It buzzed against the plastic console like an angry hornet. A steady stream of new notifications flooded the locked screen. Twitter mentions, Instagram tags, direct messages from unknown numbers I did not recognize. I pulled into my secure apartment garage, turned off the ignition, and finally picked up the dark device. Sienna had wasted absolutely zero time. She weaponized her massive social media following, broadcasting her fabricated victimhood to 300,000 eager viewers. I clicked the notification linking to her latest video. The production quality was predictably manipulative. She sat on the floor of our mother's living room, perfectly positioned so the expensive floral arrangements were visible in the blurred background. She wore an oversized cashmere sweater, looking small and fragile. Her makeup was meticulously smudged to mimic the aftermath of a genuine breakdown. She stared into the camera with wide, tear-filled eyes, delivering a masterclass in psychological manipulation. She claimed our grandfather Marcus was rapidly losing his cognitive faculties. She used the word dementia with a hushed, tragic whisper. She told her followers a bitter, estranged family member had swooped in to take advantage of a dying, confused old man. She never used my name, but she painted a vivid portrait of a jealous outcast who conned her way into controlling the family estate, stripping Sienna of the inheritance she supposedly needed to fund her beautiful life. She sobbed on cue, burying her face in her hands, begging for support during this dark time of familial betrayal. The video had been live for less than an hour, and already had 80,000 views. The comment section was a toxic wasteland of misplaced sympathy and targeted vitriol. Trevor mobilized his family members to lead the digital mob. His cousins and aunts, people who always looked down on me during the holidays we shared, were out in full force. Their comments were laced with undeniable racial undertones. They called me an aggressive, money-hungry leech. They speculated I was an uneducated desk worker who forged legal documents because I was inherently incapable of managing real wealth. They used words like hostile and dangerous, playing into every ugly stereotype to defend their fragile relative. My direct messages were worse. Strangers who felt intimately connected to Sienna's carefully curated lifestyle sent paragraphs of pure hatred. They threatened to find my workplace. They promised to expose me to the authorities. They demanded I give the money back to the rightful heir. My phone grew hot in my hand as the notifications continued to pour in, a digital avalanche designed to crush my spirit and force a very panicked surrender. Sienna expected me to immediately react. She wanted me to post a frantic defense, to look unhinged and desperate, which would only validate her entirely false narrative. I locked my phone and tossed it into my passenger seat. I was not going to fight a battle in the comment section of an application. I was going to fight a war in the real world. I woke Maya gently, carrying her upstairs to our apartment. I settled her onto the sofa with her favorite animated movie and a bowl of fresh fruit kissing her forehead before stepping into my home office. I made a quick call to my trusted nanny, asking her to come over immediately. When she arrived, I changed out of my casual Sunday clothes and put on a sharply tailored charcoal blazer. I grabbed my leather briefcase and headed straight back out the door. My destination was not a police station or a legal office. It was a private elevator bank in the lobby of the most exclusive high-rise in the financial district. A pair of broad-shouldered security guards checked my identification before scanning their key cards, granting me access to the penthouse level. The elevator doors glided open to reveal a sprawling glass-walled residence overlooking the entire city skyline. Grandpa Marcus was sitting at a massive mahogany dining table wearing a crisp suit, looking out at the sprawling metropolis he conquered decades ago. He did not look confused. He did not look frail. He looked like a king who was fully aware that traitors were storming the gates. He had a tablet propped up on the table in front of him, the volume turned down, but the video of Sienna's tearful performance was looping on the bright screen. He looked up as I approached, his dark eyes sharp and utterly devoid of the dementia Sienna had so publicly diagnosed him with. "You saw the broadcast," I said, taking the seat directly across from him. "I saw a foolish girl playing a dangerous game," Marcus replied, his voice a low, steady rumble that commanded absolute respect. "She believes she can win a public relations war because she thinks money is just about buying expensive things and gaining popularity. She has no idea what real power looks like." "Trevor is rallying his relatives," I told him, folding my hands on the table. "They are painting me as a hostile outsider stealing their legacy. They think they can intimidate me into unfreezing the accounts before the week is over." Marcus reached out and tapped the glass screen of the tablet, silencing the video permanently. He looked at me with a profound, unshakable pride. "Let them talk, Chloe. Let them dig their own graves with their public lies. When the truth comes out, the drop will be absolutely spectacular." He opened the black leather briefcase sitting next to his chair. He reached inside, pulled out a very thick, heavy manila envelope, and slid it across the polished mahogany surface toward me. I broke the wax seal on the heavy envelope and pulled out a meticulously organized stack of financial documents alongside printed emails. Marcus watched my eyes scan the top page. It was a detailed ledger exposing Trevor stealing funds from his own clients to cover his mounting gambling debts. The next page revealed Patricia funneling money from a charity foundation into an offshore account. "You see," Chloe, Marcus said softly, "they think they hold all the cards because they are loud. But the loudest people are usually hiding the most devastating secrets." I carefully placed the papers back. This was not just leverage. This was absolute destruction. I thanked my grandfather, clutching the envelope to my chest, and headed down to the lobby. The drive home felt completely different. The crushing weight of their constant judgment was entirely gone. I unlocked my front door, expecting a quiet evening with my daughter. Maya was sitting on the living room rug, happily coloring in her favorite book. I set the envelope on the kitchen counter and took a deep breath. We were safe. Then came the sound. 3 sharp, aggressive knocks hammered against the wooden door, rattling the frame. The sheer force of it made Maya drop her crayons. I hurried to the door and peered through the peephole. 2 uniformed police officers stood in the hallway, flanked by a stern-looking man and woman holding clipboards. My stomach plummeted. I opened the door slowly. "Chloe, Marcus," the woman asked, her voice devoid of any warmth. "I am Agent Collins with Child Protective Services. This is Agent Brooks. We have received an urgent anonymous report regarding the immediate safety and welfare of your daughter. We need to come inside, now." They did not wait for an invitation. The 2 agents pushed past me into the small entryway, the police officers stepping in right behind them to block the door. "What is this about?" I demanded, my protective instincts instantly flaring as I stepped between them and the living room where Maya sat frozen. Agent Brooks held up a tablet, swiping the screen before holding it inches from my face. The image was undeniable, yet entirely fabricated in its context. It was a photograph of Maya from last Thanksgiving. She was sobbing, her small face red and twisted in anguish. I remembered that exact moment perfectly. Sienna had purposely stepped on Maya's favorite toy car, snapping the plastic wheels, and then laughed about it. But the photograph was cropped tight, focusing only on my crying child, and my hand reaching out, freezing the frame to make it look like I was striking her. "The anonymous report claims you have a history of severe neglect and physical abuse," Agent Collins stated coldly. The caller stated you frequently withhold food, lock her in dark rooms, and exhibit extreme psychological instability. They also claimed you recently caused a massive disturbance at a family gathering because of a violent mental breakdown. Trevor and Patricia. They had actually done it. They weaponized the government to tear my child away. My blood ran cold as the sheer malice of their calculated plans settled over me. They knew I held the keys to their stolen wealth, so they decided to strike at the only thing I valued more than money. They wanted to take my daughter to force a concession. "This is an orchestrated smear campaign by my estranged family," I said, keeping my voice dangerously steady. "My daughter is perfectly healthy, happy and safe. I will not let you traumatize her based on a cropped photograph and a malicious phone call. Agent Brooks crossed his arms. We do not have a choice, Ms. Marcus. We are legally obligated to investigate claims of this severity. We need to speak with Maya alone right now. If you resist, these officers will remove her from your custody, pending a full psychiatric evaluation. My breath caught in my throat. I looked at the police officers, their hands resting near their duty belts. I had no choice. I turned to Maya, forcing a reassuring smile onto my face. It is okay, sweetie, I whispered, kneeling beside her. These people just want to ask you a few simple questions. You do not need to be afraid. Just tell them the absolute truth. Agent Collins sat on the sofa, gesturing for Maya to sit in the armchair opposite her. The police officers asked me to step into the kitchen, keeping me in their line of sight, but out of earshot. I watched my tiny daughter clutch her coloring book, her legs dangling off the edge of the chair. I stood by the granite island, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The ticking of the wall clock felt agonizingly slow. Every protective instinct screamed at me to cross the room to scoop my child into my arms and to physically throw these intruders out of my home. But I forced myself to remain completely still. I knew the law. Any sudden movement or display of aggression would only validate the fictitious profile Patricia and Trevor had painted of me. I had to trust my daughter. I had to trust the bond we shared. I strained to hear the conversation. Agent Collins leaned forward, speaking in a hushed, gentle tone, clearly trying to coax a confession of abuse from a 5-year-old. Does your mommy ever hurt you, Maya? The agent asked softly. Does she yell or make you feel scared? Maya looked down at her shoes, her little shoulders trembling. She shook her head slowly. Then she looked up, her brown eyes shining with an unexpected fierce bravery. Mommy never hurts me, Maya said clearly, her voice carrying across the quiet room. But Auntie Sienna hurts me. She took me to the very big store today and told me to stay on the floor. Then she smiled at the camera and drove away in her white car. She left me all alone there. The silence following my daughter's words was deafening. Agent Collins stared at Maya, her pen frozen above her digital tablet. Agent Brooks exchanged a sharp glance with the two police officers. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The accusatory energy evaporated, replaced by a tense realization that they had been manipulated. Agent Collins cleared her throat, her voice losing its cold edge. She asked Maya to repeat what she had just said. Maya did not waver. She recounted the entire afternoon with precise, devastating honesty. She described the toy aisle, the stern command to stay put, the deliberate walk to the exit, and the white car driving away. I watched the color drain from Agent Brooks' face. He stepped outside to contact the precinct. Less than 5 minutes later, he walked back inside, his jaw set. He nodded to his partner. Officer Davis had already filed the endangerment report. The timeline matched perfectly. The CPS agents apologized to me, packing up their equipment, their faces burning with professional embarrassment. Agent Collins assured me the case against me would be closed immediately and that a formal investigation into Sienna was now active. I locked the door behind them, scooped Maya into my arms, and held her until her breathing steadied. We had survived their vicious attack, but I knew Trevor and Patricia were not going to stop. They were cornered animals desperate for a lifeline. The next morning, I dressed in a sharp navy suit, kissed Maya goodbye, and headed to the Apex Holdings Tower. I needed to finalize the asset freeze documentation and brief the legal team on the CPS incident. The marble lobby of the financial building was bustling with early morning executives grabbing coffee and swiping security badges. I walked purposefully toward the private secure executive elevators. Before I could reach the security turnstiles, a heavy hand grabbed my arm, yanking me backward. I spun around, ready to shout for building security. Trevor stood there, blocking my path. He looked entirely different from the smug, polished lawyer who had been ordering vintage champagne just 48 hours ago. His expensive designer suit was wrinkled, his tie was loose, his eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with dark, heavy circles that betrayed a profound lack of sleep. The charming facade was gone, revealing the desperate, ugly reality underneath. "We need to talk right now," Trevor demanded, his grip tightening on my sleeve. His breath smelled faintly of stale whiskey. I yanked my arm out of his grasp, stepping back to maintain my personal space. You have exactly 10 seconds to leave this building before I have security throw you out onto the pavement. Trevor scoffed a desperate manic sound. You are not calling anyone. You are going to listen to me. I went to the bank this morning. Everything is still locked. Sienna cannot even buy a cup of coffee. My firm credit cards are bouncing. You are going to pull out your phone log into that secure administrator portal, unfreeze the accounts, and wire $2 million directly into my personal holding account. I stared at him, genuinely amazed by his audacity. You sent Child Protective Services to my home with fabricated abuse allegations, terrified my daughter, and now you are demanding $2 million. You are completely delusional, Trevor. You will not get a single cent. His face twisted into an ugly snarl. He stepped closer, trying to physically intimidate me. You do not understand how this world works, Chloe. You think you hold the power because your grandfather handed you some digital keys. But you are playing in a league you do not comprehend. I am a partner at a prominent firm. I have golfed with federal judges. I have senators in my phone contacts. If you do not wire that money by noon, I am going to make your life a living hell. I crossed my arms, waiting. I will file an emergency petition for custody of Maya, Trevor hissed. Patricia and I will testify that you are an unfit mother. We will hire the most vicious family law attorneys. We will bury you in legal fees until you are bankrupt and homeless. And who do you think the courts are going to believe? Look at us, Chloe. Who is a judge going to hand a child over to? A wealthy, highly connected, upstanding white family with a pristine suburban home, or a single black mother living in a city apartment? The sheer naked racism and classism of his threat hung in the air between us. He was fully weaponizing the systemic biases of the justice system, confident that his privilege would automatically override my truth. He expected me to cry, to beg, to pull out my phone and transfer the funds to protect my child. He thought he had found the ultimate leverage. I did not flinch. I did not break his eye contact. I looked at the sweat beading on his forehead, the slight tremor in his hands. I let the silence stretch, allowing his threats to evaporate into nothingness. You talk a lot about your connections, Trevor. I said, my voice dangerously soft and perfectly composed. You talk about your firm and your wealth, but you are demanding $2 million by noon. A man with real wealth does not need a wire to survive a Tuesday. Trevor swallowed hard. Just wire the money, Chloe. Do not test me. I leaned in, completely unbothered by his towering frame. I smiled, a sharp, cold expression that made him take an involuntary step backward. I know exactly why you need that cash, Trevor. I manage the entire family's risk portfolios. I see absolutely everything. I see the offshore accounts. I see the rapid, massive withdrawals over the past 6 months. So, before you start threatening me with imaginary judges, answer one simple question. Trevor stared at me, his face draining of all color. Does Sienna know about the loan sharks in Vegas? Or is that our little secret? Trevor stumbled back as if I had physically struck him across his jaw. The arrogant sneer melted off his face, replaced by a hollow gray panic. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. His eyes darted around the marble lobby, suddenly terrified that the passing executives could read the guilt radiating from his sweating pores. I did not wait for his stuttered excuses. I turned on my heel, swiped my security badge at the turnstile, and stepped into the glass elevator. As the doors glided shut, I caught one last glimpse of him standing frozen near the entrance, completely broken. He thought he was playing a game of intimidation, but he had unknowingly walked into a slaughterhouse. I stepped off the elevator and walked straight into my corner office. My assistant had already prepared my morning espresso, but I ignored it, dropping my briefcase onto the sleek mahogany desk. I booted up my encrypted workstation. As a senior risk analyst for one of the most ruthless hedge funds in the city, my daily job involved tearing apart corporate facades to find hidden liabilities. I had spent years perfecting the art of financial destruction, learning exactly how to dismantle a fraudulent empire piece by piece without leaving a single fingerprint. I had access to forensic accounting software, elite private investigators, and international banking databases that could track a single dollar across a dozen shell companies. Trevor had threatened to use his connections to destroy me. It was time to show him what real corporate warfare looked like. I started with his family name. Trevor always paraded around Seattle acting like his bloodline was royalty. He bragged about summering in the Hamptons and attending exclusive boarding schools. It took my software exactly 3 minutes to slice through that pathetic illusion. His family was not old money. They were barely new money. His father had run a small real estate development firm that filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy nearly a decade ago. The sprawling estate they claimed to own was heavily mortgaged, and the bank had quietly foreclosed on it right before Trevor met Sienna. The designer suits, the leased luxury vehicles, the country club memberships paid with high-interest credit cards were all a carefully constructed house of cards. They were just broke, desperate social climbers pretending to be aristocrats. I dug deeper, focusing specifically on his marriage to my sister. Sienna believed she had landed a wealthy, connected prince who would elevate her influencer lifestyle. The truth was far more sinister. Trevor had targeted her. My grandfather, Marcus, was a well-known billionaire, and his wealth was public knowledge in financial circles. Trevor married Sienna solely to gain access to the Marcus estate. He viewed my sister not as a partner, but as a cash machine. When Marcus unexpectedly froze the trust accounts and cut Sienna off, Trevor saw his primary revenue stream evaporate completely overnight. That explained his sudden frantic urgency to unfreeze the assets. He was not fighting for his wife and her honor. He was fighting for his own financial survival. The forensic trail grew darker as I pulled his personal bank statements. Without the influx of stolen money, Trevor could not maintain his lavish lifestyle. So he started stealing from the one person who trusted him implicitly. I watched the digital ledger light up with unauthorized transfers. He was systematically embezzling from the personal business accounts of his wife. Every time she landed a lucrative brand deal or sponsored post, Trevor skimmed 40% right off the top, funneling the cash into a hidden checking account under a fake corporate name. Sienna was too obsessed with taking perfect photographs and maintaining her digital victimhood to notice her own husband bleeding her dry. But where was the money going? The embezzlement was substantial, but it was not enough to cover the massive gaping holes in his finances. I cross-referenced the offshore accounts Marcus had originally shown me with the recent transaction history of Trevor. The pieces rapidly snapped into a terrifying picture. Trevor had a severe, unmanageable gambling addiction. The offshore accounts were not traditional investments, they were conduits to illegal betting syndicates. He had been chasing his losses for years, borrowing heavily to cover bad bets, convinced that one big win would clear his ledger. Instead, he had dug a grave he could not climb out of. My screen flashed red as the final query completed. I stared at the total liability figure, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. $2 million. That was the exact amount he had demanded from me in the lobby. He did not owe this money to a standard bank or a lenient credit card company. He owed $2 million to violent, dangerous creditors operating out of Las Vegas. Loan sharks who did not care about his firm connections or his fake old money status. They cared about getting paid, and their collection methods were notoriously brutal. His frantic behavior, the wrinkled suit, the smell of stale alcohol, the unhinged threats involving Child Protective Services, all made perfect sense now. He was a dead man walking, and he knew it. I leaned back in my chair, taking a deep breath. The sheer magnitude of his deception was breathtaking. He had terrorized my daughter and threatened to destroy my life, all while standing on a crumbling precipice of his own making. I dragged every downloaded file, every offshore receipt, every loan document, and every embezzled transfer into an encrypted master folder. I opened my presentation software, importing the financial data, and organizing it into a brutal, undeniable timeline of fraud. The charts were clean, stark, and utterly devastating. I reviewed the final slide, carefully checking the total debt figure glaring in bold red numbers. I saved the file to a secure flash drive, pulling it from the port and closing my fist tightly around the metal. My family wanted a war. The ammunition is loaded. I sat in the quiet hum of my office, the encrypted flash drive resting heavy in my palm. My mind drifted back to a specific Tuesday afternoon 4 years ago. My desk phone had rung, displaying the private number of Jonathan Vance, my notoriously discreet real estate attorney. He had called with a situation requiring immediate covert action. The sprawling suburban mansion my mother cherished was entering active foreclosure. Patricia had been bleeding her accounts dry to fund Sienna's relentless escalating demands for luxury vehicles, designer wardrobes, and lavish European vacations. The bank was 72 hours away from seizing the property and initiating a highly public eviction. Jonathan explained the sheer humiliation that would follow. The local country club gossips would feast on the scandal of Patricia being thrown out onto the street. I could not stand the thought of my mother suffering that level of public degradation, regardless of how terribly she treated me. I authorized Jonathan to intervene silently. I wired the exact payoff amount from a newly formed shell company, Apex Residential, LLC. We purchased the distressed debt directly from the bank, assuming full ownership of the property. Jonathan then presented Patricia with a highly structured, supposedly standard lease agreement from the new corporate landlord. She signed the paperwork immediately, completely oblivious to the reality of the transaction. For 4 entire years, my mother had been writing monthly rent checks directly to a corporate entity that deposited those funds straight into my holding account. She was a tenant living in a house I owned, funding my investment portfolio while simultaneously looking down her nose at my modest apartment. Patricia truly believed she had orchestrated a brilliant financial maneuver to save her home, bragging about negotiating a favorable lease with a faceless corporate conglomerate. She had no idea her own despised daughter was the landlord keeping a roof over her head. The irony was a bitter pill that I had swallowed quietly for years. Every time she criticized my lifestyle, every time she suggested I lacked the ambition to succeed in the real world, I simply nodded, knowing her rent check had cleared my account that very morning. Sienna, of course, remained entirely ignorant of the near-catastrophic financial ruin she had caused. She continued treating the mansion as her personal backdrop for social media content, posing on the sweeping marble staircase and claiming it as her generational heritage. The entire family lived in a meticulously crafted fantasy. They floated on an illusion of immense wealth propped up entirely by the very person they deemed socially and financially inferior. Now, with Trevor's criminal debts exposed and Sienna's fraudulent narrative unraveling, the foundation of their fantasy was completely compromised. I opened my personal laptop, navigating away from the heavy financial dossiers. The screen illuminated with the bright, curated interface of my social media feed. Sienna had just updated her public profile. Her face filled the screen, heavily filtered and glowing with a manufactured, radiant joy. She stood on the immaculate manicured lawn of the Oakwood Country Club, the most exclusive and notoriously expensive venue in the entire state. A massive diamond ring glittered strategically in the foreground. The caption read like a desperate plea for validation, masquerading as an announcement. She was hosting a lavish, over-the-top vow renewal ceremony this coming Saturday. She wrote extensively about surviving recent family trauma, about leaning on her perfect husband Trevor during a dark period of profound betrayal. She spun a narrative of enduring love triumphing over jealous, toxic relatives who tried to tear them apart. The guest list was public, packed with local socialites, wealthy influencers, and the upper echelon of the city elite. Then came the final sentence, dripping with passive-aggressive venom. She extended an open invitation to anyone who doubted their bond explicitly, daring her detractors to witness their unbreakable union. It was a direct, unmistakable challenge aimed squarely at me. She wanted a public spectacle. She wanted to stand in front of the city elite clad in white and silently declare victory over the sister she had tried to destroy. She believed her high society audience would serve as an impenetrable shield. Sienna wanted to play the flawless bride while her husband slowly drowned in illicit gambling debts, and my own mother secretly rented her very own childhood home from me. The sheer arrogance of hosting a 6-figure party while owing dangerous creditors $2 million was staggering. I stared at the digital invitation, the smug, challenging words burning into my screen. This was the ultimate psychological game, a final attempt to force me to surrender my leverage to preserve the family reputation and avoid a massive scandal. They thought I would cower in the shadows, terrified of their polished social circles and their vicious whispers. They were entirely and fundamentally wrong about me. I clicked the interactive link at the bottom of the post. A formal RSVP page loaded, demanding a name and a confirmation of attendance. I typed my full name into the designated text box using deliberate heavy keystrokes. I checked the box confirming my presence. Then I hit submit. The screen flashed a bright green confirmation graphic that illuminated my dark office. I leaned back, a cold, focused energy coursing through my veins. Sienna wanted her perfect dramatic audience. She wanted the bright spotlight to shine directly on her fake, crumbling empire surrounded by the elite people she so desperately needed to impress. I decided it was finally time to give her exactly what she asked for. I reached deep into my desk drawer and pulled out the small, encrypted flash drive containing Trevor's complete financial death warrant. The small metal device held the absolute power to permanently shatter their pathetic constructed reality in an instant. I placed it securely into my favorite black designer clutch. I was going to attend that lavish vow renewal, and I was going to bring their entire fragile house of cards completely crashing down. The morning of the vow renewal dawned crisp and quiet. I woke before my alarm, my mind razor-sharp and devoid of the anxiety that usually accompanied family functions. Today was an execution. My first priority was ensuring my daughter was shielded from the blast radius. I packed an overnight bag for Maya, filling it with her pajamas, storybooks, and the plush rabbit she needed to sleep. I arranged for her to spend the weekend with my closest friend, Elena, who lived in a secure community across town. Elena knew the specific contours of my situation and understood the necessity of keeping Maya disconnected from any external drama. We drove to Elena's house after breakfast. Maya babbled happily in the back seat, thrilled about baking cookies and watching movies with Elena's golden retriever. I parked behind Elena's sedan. When I hugged my daughter goodbye on the porch, I held her a fraction of a second longer than usual. I breathed in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, letting her innocent energy fortify my resolve. I kissed her forehead and walked to my car. Trevor had tried to weaponize my motherhood, assuming my love for Maya made me vulnerable to his extortion. He failed to realize that protecting her was exactly what made me dangerous. With Maya safely tucked away, I returned to my apartment to prepare my armor. Sienna had chosen the Oakwood Country Club specifically to intimidate me. The venue was a bastion of generational wealth, a place where people like my mother and sister judged human worth by the labels on clothing and the clarity of diamonds. I unzipped the opaque garment bag hanging on the back of my bedroom door. The gown inside was a masterpiece of haute couture, a custom creation I commissioned months ago for a gala in Paris before Marcus's health scare altered my schedule. It was a floor-length sheath of shimmering emerald silk that draped with liquid perfection. The bodice featured intricate hand-sewn beadwork that caught the light like crushed emeralds, while the back plunged daringly low, projecting an aura of supreme confidence. It was not a dress purchased off a rack. It was a singular work of art that cost more than the entire budget Sienna had allocated for her desperate vow renewal. I spent the next 3 hours undergoing a meticulous transformation. A professional styling team arrived to handle my hair and makeup. They pinned my hair into a sleek updo that highlighted my cheekbones and applied cosmetics to create a flawless look. I clasped a vintage diamond tennis bracelet around my wrist. I looked into the mirror. The woman staring back was a titan, completely untouchable and terrifyingly composed. My phone buzzed with a message from my grandfather. "The car is waiting downstairs." I slipped my phone and the encrypted flash drive into my clutch, locked my apartment, and descended to the lobby. A black town car transported me straight to the financial district, bypassing the usual heavy city traffic. I rode the private elevator up to Marcus's penthouse. The heavy wooden doors opened to reveal my grandfather standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking over the city. He wore a bespoke tuxedo tailored perfectly to his broad shoulders, a crisp white shirt, and a silk bow tie. He did not look anything like a man suffering from severe cognitive decline. He looked exactly like a ruthless corporate predator, ready to completely devour anyone foolish enough to challenge his territory. "You look magnificent, Chloe," he said, his voice a steady rumble of approval. He poured 2 fingers of aged scotch into crystal glasses, handing one to me. "Sienna has been posting frantic updates all morning. She is terrified you are actually going to show up and ruin her narrative of the estranged, jealous sister." I took a sip of the scotch, letting the heat bloom in my chest. "She dared me to come," I replied softly. "I am just being a polite guest." Marcus chuckled a dark, rumbling sound. He walked to a safe, hidden behind a framed painting, spun the dial, and extracted a sealed legal dossier. He placed it on the desk between us. "My attorneys finalized the trust dissolution an hour ago," he stated. "Trevor and Sienna are officially irrevocably cut off. By the time dessert is served tonight, their credit cards will be declined. The loans they took out against their imaginary inheritance will default by Monday." We stood in the quiet penthouse, the weight of the moment settling around us. The stakes were absolute. If we allowed Sienna to control the narrative tonight, she would solidify her fake empire, casting us as villains, while she continued to leech off the family name. If we struck now with maximum visibility, we would burn her fraudulent existence to the ash. We reviewed the timeline one last time. Marcus would arrive 30 minutes after me, allowing Sienna just enough time to feel a false sense of victory before the true architect of her downfall quietly entered the room. We finished our drinks and Marcus nodded. "It is time." The evening air was crisp and cool as I stepped out of the penthouse building. A massive, gleaming black Maybach sat idling at the curb. The chauffeur, a towering man in a sharp uniform, opened the rear door. I slid into the luxurious leather interior, the quiet hum of the engine isolating me from the outside world. The drive to the Oakwood Country Club took exactly 25 minutes. We turned onto the long driveway flanked by towering oak trees and manicured hedges. The club was ablaze with light, a beacon of exclusivity and forced prestige. Valets rushed to open doors for arriving guests, their eyes widening as the Maybach pulled up to the grand entrance. The chauffeur opened my door. I stepped out onto the pristine pavement, my emerald gown catching the exterior lights, a breathtaking vision of power and wealth designed to obliterate Sienna's entire world. The heavy glass doors of the Oakwood Country Club yielded to my touch, opening into a foyer bathed in golden light. I moved with deliberate slowness, my heels clicking a sharp, steady rhythm against the polished marble floor. The distant hum of a string quartet floated through the arched corridors, mingling with the low murmur of high society chatter. My emerald gown swept elegantly around my ankles, the silk whispering against stone as I approached the grand ballroom. 2 uniformed ushers stood at the entrance, their eyes widening in shock as they recognized my face. They had undoubtedly been given strict instructions to deny me entry, but the sheer confidence of my stride and the undeniable authority radiating from my posture froze them in place. They stepped aside without uttering a word, allowing me to cross the threshold into Sienna's meticulously constructed fantasy. The ballroom was a masterpiece of excessive spending, a desperate display of wealth meant to validate an empty marriage. Thousands of white roses cascaded from the vaulted ceiling, reflecting the glare of crystal chandeliers. Waiters in white tuxedos circulated with silver trays of champagne, navigating through guests clad in muted pastels. I stood at the top of the short, sweeping staircase leading down to the main floor, the vibrant emerald of my dress, acting like a beacon in the sterile room. The reaction was instantaneous. The soft chatter nearest to me faltered, then died completely, the silence spreading outward like a drop of ink in clear water. Within 10 seconds, the entire room went dead silent. The string quartet, sensing the sudden shift in atmosphere, scraped to an awkward, discordant halt. Hundreds of eyes locked onto me, a collective gasp rippling through the elite crowd as they recognized the exiled sister standing triumphantly at the apex of the room. I descended the stairs with predatory grace, my eyes scanning the crowd until they found their target. Sienna stood near the extravagant 5-tier cake draped in an expensive lace gown that swallowed her frame. Her jaw dropped, the manufactured joy melting off her face to reveal raw, unadulterated panic. Before she could react, Patricia broke through the crowd like a battering ram. My mother's face was flushed a deep crimson beneath her contouring. Her eyes blazed with a fury so intense it bordered on madness. She marched directly toward me, her diamond necklace rattling as her chest heaved with rage. She stopped 2 feet away, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face. She demanded that I leave immediately, her voice shrill and echoing in the quiet room. She turned wildly to the hovering club staff, frantically ordering security to remove the trespassing garbage from her daughter's sacred celebration. I did not flinch, nor did I offer Patricia a single word of response. I simply stared at her, an impassive statue, letting her hysterical demands expose her lack of control to the entire room. Seeing Patricia failing to intimidate me, Trevor vaulted into action. He shoved his way past the bewildered guests, inserting his frame between me and his wife. Sienna immediately clutched his arm, burying her face against his shoulder, and producing theatrical sobs that echoed across the ballroom. Trevor puffed out his chest, jutting his chin forward in a pathetic display of masculine protection. He glared down at me, his eyes wide with frantic energy. He commanded me to back away from his fragile wife, declaring that I had caused enough trauma, and he would not allow my toxic presence to ruin their profound declaration of love. He looked around the room, soaking in the sympathetic glances of the crowd, playing the ultimate savior defending his besieged bride. His performance was nauseating, especially considering the $2 million gambling debt hanging over his head and the violent loan sharks currently hunting him. I offered Trevor a cold, knowing smile, watching the false bravado flicker and die in his eyes as he remembered our encounter in his office lobby. I stepped cleanly around him, ignoring his sputtered protests, and walked purposefully toward the back of the ballroom. The audio-visual booth was elevated on a small platform near the exit, manned by a technician I had discreetly met with earlier. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea, their whispers growing frantic as I reached the booth. I opened my black clutch and extracted the sleek metal flash drive. I handed it casually to the technician. He gave me a brief, barely perceptible nod, taking the device and plugging it directly into the master console controlling the massive projector screens flanking the dance floor. Trevor realized my target a second too late. The blood drained entirely from his face, leaving him a ghastly, translucent white. He abandoned his weeping wife, shouting for someone to stop me, his voice cracking with genuine terror. Patricia, finally understanding that a catastrophic scene was unfolding, began screaming for the guards. 3 burly security men in dark suits pushed through the paralyzed guests, advancing on me with heavy, determined steps. Their faces were set in grim masks, hands reaching out to grab my arms and physically drag me from the venue. The tension in the ballroom snapped tight, the atmosphere heavy with the impending violence of my forced removal. I stood perfectly still, my chin raised, watching the guards close the final few feet. Just as the lead guard reached out to grab my bare shoulder, a sound like a thunderclap shattered the room. The grand mahogany double doors at the main entrance burst wide open, slamming violently against the interior walls. The security guards froze, spinning around to face the intrusion. Standing perfectly framed in the massive doorway was Grandpa Marcus. He wore his bespoke tuxedo with the effortless authority of an emperor, flanked by 4 massive elite private security operatives who looked ready to dismantle anyone in their path. He surveyed the stunned, silent ballroom with absolute disdain, looking like a furious king arriving to pass final judgment. The heavy silence holding the ballroom captive shattered the moment Patricia gasped, the sound sharp and echoing against the vaulted ceiling. She recovered from her initial shock with terrifying speed, immediately defaulting to the false narrative she and her daughter had so meticulously crafted for the public. Plastering a look of frantic, overly exaggerated concern across her face, my mother abandoned the security guards and practically sprinted toward the grand entrance. Sienna was right on her heels, her heavy white lace gown dragging across the polished floor as she adopted a mask of sheer pitying terror. They truly believed they could control this situation by treating my grandfather like a dementia patient who had tragically wandered away from his caregivers. Patricia reached him first, extending her manicured hands with a cloying, condescending sweetness. She spoke in a loud, deliberate stage whisper designed to carry to the front rows of the gaping audience. She cooed about how confused he must be, suggesting his nurses had been negligent and insisting they needed to get him back to his secure medical facility immediately. Sienna flanked him on the opposite side, lifting a hand to her face as if overcome with tragic grief for her declining patriarch. She actually dared to reach out and attempt to loop her arm through his, undoubtedly planning to physically steer him back out the double doors before he could ruin her six-figure photo op. Marcus did not merely brush them off. He completely repelled them with a single devastating glare. He planted his silver-tipped cane against the marble floor with a resounding crack that brought the entire room to a standstill. His voice, a booming baritone that had commanded corporate boardrooms for half a century, required no microphone to reach the furthest corners of the club. He ordered them to take their hands off him, his tone dripping with an icy contempt that stripped away their faux concern in an instant. He announced loudly and with razor-sharp articulation that he was perfectly lucid, entirely capable, and utterly disgusted by their pathetic attempts to declare him mentally incompetent for their own financial gain. The whispering among the country club elite began immediately, a rising tide of scandalous murmurs sweeping through the pastel-clad crowd. These were people who thrived on high society ruin, and they were watching the spectacular implosion of the Marcus family facade in real time. Sienna shrank back, as if physically struck, her hands dropping to her sides. The manufactured radiant joy she had projected all evening dissolved into a mask of gray, trembling panic. She looked wildly around the room, making eye contact with the wives of banking executives and local politicians, realizing they were witnessing her absolute humiliation. Ignoring the two women shrinking before him, my grandfather stepped purposefully into the center of the room. His elite security operatives formed an impenetrable barrier behind him, blocking any attempt by the club staff to intervene. Marcus walked straight toward me, his posture impeccable. He stopped at my side, turning to face the sea of shocked guests. He placed a steady, reassuring hand on my shoulder, visually aligning his immense power with my own. The contrast could not have been more stark. I stood tall in my custom emerald silk, entirely unbothered, while my mother and sister looked like cornered animals in their overpriced finery. Marcus addressed the captivated audience, directly commanding their absolute attention. He declared that for the past 6 months, he had been subjected to a relentless campaign of financial elder abuse and character assassination, orchestrated by his own daughter and youngest granddaughter. He laid bare their attempts to seize his estate by falsely claiming his mind was failing. He exposed their insatiable greed, detailing how they had drained their own accounts to fund an influencer lifestyle built entirely on smoke and mirrors. The crowd gasped collectively as Marcus methodically dismantled the illusion of Sienna's generational wealth. Then came the fatal blow. My grandfather announced with absolute legal finality that he had completely restructured his entire empire earlier that very morning. He stated that every trust account, every real estate holding, and every corporate asset previously earmarked for Patricia and Sienna had been irrevocably dissolved. He had handed full uncontested control of the Marcus fortune to the only person in the family who had ever worked a day in her life. He pointed directly at me, proclaiming to the silent room that I was the sole executor and primary beneficiary of his entire estate. Patricia let out a strangled, breathless sound, her hand flying to her throat as the reality of her destitution crashed down upon her. She was not just a tenant in my house. She was now permanently severed from the family pipeline. Sienna completely lost whatever fragile grip she still maintained on her sanity. The delicate, victimized bride persona evaporated. She let out a piercing shriek, stomping her foot like a petulant toddler. She screamed about her social media brand, about how unfair this was, and about her inherent right to the family money. Her unhinged tantrum only further solidified Marcus's claims, confirming her extreme entitlement to everyone watching. The total destruction of their narrative hung heavy in the opulent ballroom. Sienna was sobbing uncontrollably, her makeup running in dark streaks down her face, screaming accusations that no one believed. Patricia stood frozen, calculating the immediate collapse of her country club status. The city elite were already turning away from them in disgust, their whispers turning into open mockery. The empire they thought they owned had just been handed to the woman they had tried to throw out. Trevor, however, was doing a different kind of terrifying math. He stood near the cake, his eyes darting frantically between my grandfather, the furious crowd, and the exit. He knew the $2 million debt he owed to the Vegas loan sharks had just become an immediate death sentence. Without Sienna's access to the Marcus Trust, he had zero leverage and zero cash. Desperation hijacked his common sense. His face flushed with a manic, sweaty heat as he realized he had to regain control of the room before the whispers turned into a stampede. Straightening his wrinkled tuxedo jacket, Trevor pushed past his weeping wife and marched directly toward the stage, his eyes fixed wildly on the microphone resting on the vacant podium. He snatched the heavy silver microphone from its stand, turning to face the shocked crowd with a sickly, desperate grin, preparing to deliver a speech about family forgiveness and his own vast imaginary wealth. "We all know that true wealth is measured in grace," Trevor stammered into the microphone, his voice echoing with a high-pitched, frantic tremor. He gripped the silver stem so tightly, his knuckles turned a pale, mottled white, his eyes darting wildly across the vast sea of elite guests. "My family has always believed deeply in forgiveness. As a man of substantial means and deep heritage, I am entirely willing to look past this tragic, unfortunate outburst from a clearly troubled relative extending the very grace that my family's legacy is built upon." He wiped a heavy bead of sweat from his temple, desperately trying to project the image of a benevolent aristocrat, gracefully handling a peasant's rebellion. I did not let him finish his pathetic soliloquy. I caught the eye of the audiovisual technician hovering in the elevated booth. I raised my right hand, giving him a single deliberate nod. The technician slammed his hand down on the master control board. The soft, ambient club lighting immediately cut out, plunging the ballroom into a stark, theatrical darkness. The twin massive projector screens flanking the dance floor flared to life with blinding intensity. Trevor flinched, shielding his eyes as 10-foot-tall images flooded the room. He turned to look at the screens, expecting perhaps the curated slideshow of their romantic vacations Sienna had prepared. Instead, a colossal high-definition image of a Chapter 11 bankruptcy filing loomed over the crowd. The bold red letters at the top clearly displayed the name of his father's defunct real estate firm, highlighting their absolute ruin. The crowd gasped in unison. The technician expertly and rapidly cycled through the encrypted files I had provided. A foreclosure notice on his family's heavily mortgaged estate flashed across the left screen, showing the exact dates of their default. On the right, Trevor's personal bank statements appeared, explicitly highlighting the massive unauthorized 40% skims he had been funneling into fake corporate accounts. The absolute devastation came with the final set of slides. Blown up for the entire country club to read were the vicious, explicit text messages from the Las Vegas underground betting syndicates. The terrifying messages detailed specific threats involving broken kneecaps and a looming non-negotiable $2 million deadline. Trevor dropped the microphone. It hit the polished dance floor with a deafening shriek of feedback that made the front row of guests cover their ears. He stood paralyzed, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish, completely stripped of his arrogant armor. I stepped forward, picking up the discarded microphone. The feedback whined momentarily before I stabilized the frequency. I turned to face the horrified high society crowd, making deliberate eye contact with the very people who had sneered at me hours earlier. "This is the reality of the man demanding your respect," I announced, my voice cutting through the stunned silence with absolute surgical precision. "You are looking at a desperate broke fraud who married into my family solely to survive his own catastrophic financial failures. I gestured toward the glaring red numbers on the screens, walking slowly around Trevor's frozen form. You paraded around our city wearing bespoke suits funded by high-interest credit cards. I continued projecting my voice so it reached the opulent chandeliers. You weaponized your whiteness using the illusion of aristocratic generational wealth as an impenetrable shield. You expected everyone in this room to simply bow to your perceived pedigree, assuming your skin color and your country club memberships automatically equated to success and integrity. I paused, letting the heavy truth settle over the predominantly white audience. Meanwhile, you viewed my grandfather's legacy as your personal bailout fund. You targeted a wealthy black family intending to leech off generations of our hard-earned excellence to cover your illegal gambling debts. You foolishly thought we were simply too naive to notice the massive continuous drain, too eager for your societal validation to question the missing funds. You did not marry my sister out of genuine, authentic love. You married her because you were a drowning man looking for a lucrative raft, and you assumed our black wealth was rightfully yours for the taking. You are truly nothing but a common, pathetic thief, hiding behind a tailored tuxedo and a false smile. The reaction from Trevor's own relatives was instantaneous and brutal. His parents, who had spent the entire evening sipping premium champagne and looking down their noses at my grandfather's associates, were suddenly the center of a horrific public execution. The surrounding guests physically stepped away from them, creating a wide, isolating circle of sheer disgust. His mother buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with profound, undeniable shame, as she realized her social standing was permanently ruined. His father's face burned a furious, mottled purple. Without uttering a single word in defense of his son, Trevor's father grabbed his wife by the elbow. They turned their backs on the altar, marching briskly toward the exit with their heads bowed low. The rest of his extended family immediately followed suit, practically running for the valet stand to escape the radioactive fallout of his exposure. They abandoned him to the slaughter, refusing to go down with his sinking ship. Trevor stood utterly alone in the center of the vast ballroom. The screens behind him continued to broadcast his $2 million death sentence. His parents were gone. His elite friends were whispering in revulsion. His fake empire had been burned to ashes in front of the entire city. The remaining color drained from his face, replaced by a dark, unhinged madness. He realized he had nothing left to lose and nowhere left to hide. His chest heaved heavily as he let out a guttural, animalistic roar of pure defeat. His eyes locked onto me wide and filled with pure, murderous rage. The illusion of the sophisticated gentleman completely vanished. Trevor lunged forward, his tailored suit straining as his hands outstretched like vicious claws, aiming directly for my exposed throat with a desperate, violent intent. He never even made it past the first step. The 4 elite security operatives flanking Marcus moved with terrifying, coordinated speed. The lead guard stepped smoothly into Trevor's path, executing a flawless, brutal takedown. He grabbed Trevor's outstretched wrist, twisting the arm sharply behind his back, while driving a heavy combat boot into the back of Trevor's knee. The sickening thud of bone hitting polished marble echoed like a gunshot. Trevor's manic roar morphed instantly into a pathetic, breathless yelp. The guards pinned him seamlessly to the floor, their faces completely devoid of emotion. They treated the arrogant country club aristocrat like a common street thug. The surrounding guests shrieked and scrambled backwards, spilling champagne in their haste to escape the sudden violence. Marcus did not flinch. He merely adjusted his silk cuffs, staring down at the writhing man with absolute disdain. Sienna stood paralyzed in the center of the room. Her eyes darted wildly between her subdued husband and the massive projector screens still broadcasting his catastrophic financial ruin. The horrifying reality of her situation finally pierced through her thick layers of delusion. She was not married to a billionaire visionary who would fund her lavish lifestyle. She was legally tethered to a desperate broke gambler who was currently being hunted by violent loan sharks. A horrific guttural scream ripped from her throat. It was not the delicate theatrical crying she had utilized earlier to garner sympathy. It was the raw, ugly sound of a spoiled child realizing her entire universe had just collapsed. She grabbed the sides of her expensive lace gown and violently yanked, ripping the delicate fabric in a frenzy of pure frustration. She screamed at Trevor, her voice cracking as she called him a liar, a parasite, and a fraud. She demanded to know where her promised European estates were, completely ignoring the reality that he was currently being bound by private security. The crowd watched in absolute horror as the bride destroyed her own reception. She ripped white roses from the nearest centerpiece and hurled them blindly. Her carefully crafted high society brand disintegrated with every hysterical shriek. Realizing she could not physically attack the heavily armed security guards or her restrained husband, Sienna whipped her head toward me. Her ruined face contorted with a venomous, blistering hatred. She stomped forward, her chest heaving heavily, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. She screamed that I had intentionally ruined her life. She bellowed to the silent room that I orchestrated this entire spectacle, because I had always been pathologically jealous of her perfection. Her voice grew increasingly shrill as she loudly proclaimed that no matter what Marcus just announced regarding the corporate trust accounts, she still emerged victorious. She boasted frantically that the historic Oakwood estate, the sprawling family mansion we grew up in, was legally untouchable. She shrieked that the mansion belonged to her and Patricia, and that I would forever remain the unwanted, orphaned outsider. She called me a bitter stray dog who could never truly belong in their elite world. She insisted, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling, that she would sell the estate tomorrow, rebuild her fortune, and permanently erase my name from their history. Patricia stepped up immediately beside her spiraling daughter. Her posture was rigid with desperate, blinding pride. She wrapped a protective, enabling arm around Sienna's shaking shoulders, presenting a unified front of absolute toxicity. My mother glared at me with eyes completely devoid of any maternal warmth. She told me in a voice cold enough to freeze the champagne in the glasses around us that I was officially dead to them. She declared that any lingering shred of familial obligation had been incinerated by my grotesque display of jealousy and malice tonight. She commanded me to turn around, walk out the heavy wooden doors, and never set foot on their property again. She specifically weaponized the Oakwood estate, claiming it was their sacred sanctuary and the ultimate symbol of their lasting power. She threatened that my presence there would constitute criminal trespassing, and she would eagerly have me arrested if I ever dared to approach the massive iron gates. She demanded I get out of her sight and off her pristine land forever, her voice dripping with absolute unfiltered venom as she tried to reclaim her shattered dignity in front of her judgmental peers. I did not react to their profound hatred or their pathetic threats. I maintained my absolute composure, my silence acting as a dark, impenetrable mirror, reflecting their unhinged, desperate chaos back at them. The entire country club ballroom held its collective breath, silently waiting for my final response to my mother's brutal, unforgiving banishment. I did not scream, I did not cry, and I simply did not retreat. Slowly and deliberately, I reached into my black silk clutch. My fingers bypassed my phone and closed around a heavy folded document I had prepared specifically for this exact inevitable moment. I withdrew a pristine folded stack of thick parchment paper. The crisp rustle of the pages seemed unnaturally loud in the dead, suffocating quiet of the room. I smoothed out the sharp creases with agonizing slowness, making sure everyone could see the official state seals printed clearly at the top. I tilted the pages slightly, revealing the bold blue ink of a notary seal gleaming brightly under the brilliant chandelier light. Patricia stopped talking immediately, her eyes locking onto the document with a sudden, dreadful suspicion. Sienna halted her manic sobbing, wiping her ruined mascara as she stared blankly at the papers in my hand. I stepped forward, effortlessly closing the remaining physical distance between us. My emerald gown shimmered gracefully as I raised my arm. With a perfectly blank, calm expression, I pressed the formidable legal document directly into my stunned mother's violently trembling hands. Patricia stared down at the thick parchment, her eyes darting frantically across the dense legal jargon as if trying to decipher a complex, ancient foreign language she had never seen before in her life. The heavy gold seal in the corner seemed to maliciously mock her rapidly fading aristocratic pretense. She blinked rapidly and repeatedly, her perfectly manicured fingernails digging violently into the expensive paper until the crisp edges completely crumpled under the immense physical pressure. Sienna peered over her shoulder, her tear-streaked face contorting into a pathetic, agonizing mask of utter bewilderment and shock. They were both desperately searching for a hidden loophole, a clerical mistake, or a punchline to a cruel joke they simply did not understand, praying for a quick escape from reality. I did not give them the luxury of processing the devastating information in private. I took a deliberate step back, ensuring the attention of every single guest in the Oakwood Country Club remained fixed squarely on me. My voice carried effortlessly through the cavernous ballroom, sharp and unyielding, slicing right through the heavy, stagnant air. I addressed my mother directly, but my words were a public broadcast designed to completely dismantle the last remaining pillar of her entirely fabricated, pathetic reality. You have spent the last decade boasting about the historic Oakwood estate, treating it like a royal palace that elevated you far above the rest of this city and its ordinary residents. You hosted lavish charity galas, held exclusive garden parties, and used that sprawling property to ruthlessly gatekeep your elite social circle. What you conveniently forgot to mention to your wealthy friends was the suffocating mountain of toxic debt crushing the very foundation of your beloved sanctuary. I watched Patricia flinch, her breath hitching painfully as the ugly truth spilled out into the open. 3 years ago, the bank initiated secret foreclosure proceedings due to your chronic financial negligence and Sienna's insatiable, reckless spending habits. You were 60 days away from having your prized possessions thrown onto the pristine front lawn by merciless county sheriffs. The urgent notifications were buried, the final warnings willfully ignored, and the harsh reality aggressively denied to maintain your pristine public image. You actually thought you had miraculously dodged a fatal bullet when the bank suddenly dropped the foreclosure case and the threatening letters abruptly stopped arriving in the mail. You ignorantly attributed your sudden financial salvation to a random clerical error or a stroke of divine intervention, fitting for your perceived high status in our community. You never bothered to look into the anonymous holding company that swooped in at the 11th hour to purchase the distressed debt. You simply went right back to your endless shopping sprees, entirely oblivious to the true identity of your actual savior standing right in front of you. I founded that specific shell company intentionally to protect the family legacy you were so incredibly eager to carelessly squander. I poured the massive profits from my own highly successful ventures into paying off your massive arrears, essentially bailing out the very women who constantly treated me like a repulsive burden. I bought the mortgage, settled the outstanding property taxes, and secured the original deed while you were busy planning Sienna's lavish, thoroughly unnecessary vow renewal. I reached out and sharply tapped the top of the parchment clutched in my mother's frozen, trembling hands. Read the bold print at the bottom of the second page, Mother. Patricia's lips trembled violently as she forced her terrified eyes downward to the highlighted text. Her mouth moved silently, forming syllables her paralyzed brain actively refused to properly comprehend. The silence in the extravagant ballroom was absolute, a collective holding of breath by hundreds of captivated, incredibly judgmental spectators. Since she was clearly incapable of speaking the dreaded words aloud, I gladly did it for her. I recited the legal transfer of ownership entirely from memory, my tone ringing with absolute, undeniable authority that commanded respect. The document dictates the unconditional transfer of the Oakwood estate, including the main house, the surrounding 20 acres of landscaped gardens, and all associated structural outbuildings, to the sole and exclusive ownership of Chloe Marcus. I watched the horrifying realization detonate behind my mother's eyes, a catastrophic explosion of understanding that instantly shattered her carefully curated fantasy world. The solid ground beneath her expensive designer heels had just evaporated into thin air. I held her panicked, darting gaze, allowing my facial expression to harden into a cold mask of pure, unapologetic retribution. You do not own that magnificent house, Mom. I do. The collective gasp from the surrounding country club crowd was deafening, a massive wave of shock that washed over the room and left absolute devastation in its destructive wake. I took one final, highly deliberate step toward the broken woman who had ruthlessly tormented me for a lifetime. And considering you viciously kicked me out of it last week, throwing my personal belongings into the street like common garbage, this legal document serves as your official 30-day eviction notice. You and your spoiled daughter have exactly until the end of the month to pack whatever cheap imitation items you actually legally own and vacate my property entirely, effectively leaving you permanently homeless and utterly destitute by your own spectacular miscalculations. The absolute finality of my words acted like a massive physical blow to her chest. Patricia's knees buckled instantly, her rigid posture completely collapsing under the crushing weight of her sudden poverty. She dropped heavily into a nearby velvet dining chair, her hands flying to her throat as she gasped loudly for air. Her eyes wide and completely terrified darted toward me, the horrifying truth finally settling in her shallow heart. She had spent her entire life blindly worshipping the parasitic golden child, while actively destroying the brilliant, capable daughter, who actually held the absolute keys to her survival. She realized entirely too late that she had fundamentally chosen the wrong daughter, but the night isn't over. The suffocating silence inside the grand ballroom was abruptly shattered by a distant, high-pitched wail cutting through the cool evening air. Initially, it was a faint mechanical whine bleeding through the heavy, soundproofed glass of the country club's massive floor-to-ceiling windows. Within seconds, the noise amplified dramatically, multiplying into a chaotic, overlapping chorus of blaring sirens tearing down the private driveway. The piercing, urgent sound grew deafeningly loud, effectively paralyzing the elite guests who were already reeling from the catastrophic financial exposure of the groom and the brutal eviction of the bride's mother. I watched the heavy velvet drapes illuminate with alternating aggressive flashes of red and blue light, casting eerie, frantic shadows across the polished marble floors and the horrified faces of the high society crowd. Sienna, who had been staring vacantly at the crumpled eviction notice clutched in our mother's trembling hands, suddenly snapped her head toward the grand entrance. A profound transformation washed over her face. The crushing despair of losing her mansion, her fortune, and her fake billionaire husband magically evaporated instantly, replaced by a manic, terrifying gleam of absolute triumph. She actually laughed, a sharp, unhinged sound that echoed strangely against the wailing sirens outside. She aggressively wiped the ruined, blackened mascara from her cheeks, standing up straighter and smoothing the torn edges of her lace wedding gown. She looked directly at me, her chest heaving with a surge of adrenaline, entirely convinced she was about to witness my ultimate downfall. She pointed a shaking finger directly at my chest, her voice rising above the ambient panic rippling through the wealthy spectators. She screamed that I had pushed her too far, boasting she anticipated my jealousy and took precautions to destroy my life. She gleefully announced to the bewildered room that earlier that afternoon she had placed an anonymous, highly detailed phone call to Child Protective Services. She proudly declared she had fabricated a horrific report accusing me of severe neglect and endangerment, detailing fabricated conditions that would guarantee the immediate removal of my children from my custody. Sienna cackled, a genuinely disturbing sound, insisting the police had finally arrived to drag me away in handcuffs and strip me of the only thing I truly loved. She taunted me, her voice dripping with vindictive poison, claiming that while I might have stolen her childhood home, she had successfully orchestrated the permanent destruction of my family. The heavy mahogany double doors of the ballroom burst open with a resounding crash. 4 uniformed police officers marched aggressively into the reception, their expressions grim and professional. Their heavy utility belts clanked against the eerie silence that descended upon the terrified crowd. The sea of wealthy guests scrambled frantically out of their way, parting to create a wide, unobstructed path straight down the center of the dance floor. The flashing blue and red emergency lights from their cruisers parked outside spilled into the opulent room, painting the crystal chandeliers in harsh colors. The officers moved with undeniable purpose, their eyes scanning the bewildered crowd as they advanced toward the altar where the shattered remnants of the wedding party stood frozen. Sienna vibrated with excitement. She stepped forward, placing herself in the officer's line of sight, eager to play the role of the concerned citizen who had bravely reported a monster. She raised her hand, gesturing frantically toward where I stood calmly beside my grandfather's security detail. She called out to the lead officer, a stern-looking woman with a tight blonde bun, identifying me as the abusive mother they had come to apprehend. She urged them to hurry, spouting fabricated nonsense about my instability and the immediate danger my children were supposedly facing under my roof. Sienna was so entirely consumed by her own malicious fantasy, so invested in the illusion she manufactured to ruin me, that she failed to notice the officer's actual trajectory. The four officers did not even glance in my direction. They marched straight past me, their heavy boots thudding rhythmically against the polished dance floor. They bypassed the overturned floral arrangements, ignored the shattered champagne flutes, and walked purposefully around Trevor, who was still pinned securely to the ground by Marcus's security team. The lead officer stopped dead in her tracks, coming to a halt exactly 2 feet away from my sister. Sienna's triumphant smile faltered slightly, a flicker of genuine confusion piercing through her impenetrable wall of absolute delusion. She lowered her pointing finger, her brow furrowing as she looked at the grim, unyielding faces of the armed police officers, now forming a tight, inescapable perimeter around her. The lead officer did not offer a polite greeting or a comforting smile. She unclipped a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from her utility belt, the metallic clink echoing sharply in the dead quiet of the ballroom. She looked Sienna directly in the eyes, her voice projecting with absolute chilling authority that commanded the attention of every single person in the room. She ordered Sienna to turn around immediately and place both her hands flat behind her back. Sienna gasped loudly, taking a stumbling, panicked step backward, her eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated terror as she realized the catastrophic mistake she had made. She stammered frantically, shaking her head, insisting that they had the wrong person, and pointing desperately back at me. The lead officer stepped forward swiftly and expertly, grabbing Sienna's wrist and twisting it behind her back with very practiced efficiency. She loudly and clearly announced to the entire captivated country club that Sienna was officially being placed under formal arrest. The officer's voice cut through Sienna's hysterical, piercing shrieks, declaring that she was being formally charged with felony child endangerment for abandoning her own stepchildren at a dangerous location earlier that week, and for the severe malicious crime of filing a false weaponized police report to Child Protective Services. The sharp, definitive click of the handcuffs locking securely around Sienna's wrists served as the ultimate undeniable punctuation to her own complete and utter ruin. Sienna thrashed wildly against the cold, unforgiving steel restricting her wrists, the heavy, intricate lace of her custom designer gown tearing further as she struggled. Her tear-streaked face twisted into a grotesque mask of absolute disbelief, her mind entirely incapable of processing the harsh reality of her arrest. Patricia shrieked from her collapsed position in the velvet chair, demanding the officers unhand her precious daughter immediately. My mother frantically threatened massive lawsuits, screaming that she personally knew the police chief and would have all their badges by morning. The lead officer remained completely unfazed by the hysterical threats, tightening her grip on Sienna's arm to keep the frantic bride securely in place. I raised the heavy microphone back to my lips, the sharp feedback instantly slicing through Patricia's shrill demands and silencing the chaotic room once again. I looked directly into Sienna's wide, terrified eyes, letting a cold, humorless smile touch my face. I informed her that I did not simply spend the afternoon crying to Grandpa Marcus about my sudden eviction. I explained that I had taken a very productive detour before arriving at this lavish reception. I told the captive audience that I had walked straight into the district attorney's office with a highly compelling piece of evidence, Sienna stopped struggling, her chest heaving as a brand new wave of dread washed over her ruined features. I explained that while she had spent her morning fabricating a malicious Child Protective Services report to destroy my family, I had spent mine delivering absolute irrefutable proof of her own monstrous actions. I did not need to rely on pathetic lies or anonymous phone calls to ruin her life, because her own arrogant negligence provided all the ammunition I required. I turned toward the elevated audiovisual booth and gave the technician one final decisive nod. The massive twin projector screens, which had previously broadcast the catastrophic details of Trevor's looming bankruptcy, flickered briefly. The bright red foreclosure notices and illicit gambling debts vanished, replaced instantly by the crisp, undeniable clarity of high-definition security camera footage. The bold white text at the bottom corner of the screens displayed a clear, recent timestamp and the distinct logo of a local Target retail store. The entire country club ballroom fell into a deathly suffocating breathless silence as the guests collectively turned their attention to the towering displays. The footage began rolling, showcasing a busy, brightly lit store filled with afternoon shoppers. Sienna was instantly recognizable in the center of the frame, wearing her signature oversized designer sunglasses and clutching a wildly expensive Birkin bag. She was aggressively dragging a crying 5-year-old girl by the arm down the main aisle. The child was Trevor's daughter from his previous marriage, a little girl Sienna had publicly claimed to love like her own during her heavily rehearsed wedding vows just hours earlier. The video clearly captured the profound annoyance contorting Sienna's face as the small child continued to sob and pull back. The crowd watched in absolute horror as Sienna forcibly led the distressed 5-year-old deep into the sprawling, crowded toy section. The camera angle shifted perfectly, providing a completely unobstructed, clear view of Sienna's calculated cruelty. She abruptly stopped walking, releasing the child's small arm with a vicious, cold, dismissive shove. Sienna quickly pulled out her smartphone, ignoring the little girl who was currently wiping tears from her flushed cheeks. The bride then looked around the bustling aisle, her head swiveling deliberately to ensure no store employees or lingering shoppers were actively watching her. Satisfied that she was temporarily unobserved, Sienna simply turned her back on the crying child. The footage showed her increasing her pace, her designer heels carrying her swiftly away from the toy section. She wove effortlessly through the maze of retail displays, never once looking over her shoulder to check on the 5-year-old she was supposed to be supervising. The silent video tracked her uninterrupted progress right out the sliding glass exit doors, stepping into the bright sunlight, and leaving the terrified, abandoned little girl completely alone in a massive, unfamiliar environment. The ballroom erupted in a collective gasp of pure, unadulterated revulsion. The high society guests, who moments ago merely judged Trevor's empty bank accounts with quiet whispers, now glared at Sienna with absolute, unfiltered disgust. Financial ruin was a scandalous misstep in their elite circles, but calculated child abandonment was an unforgivable monstrosity. Patricia covered her mouth with trembling hands, stumbling backward as her closest friends actively stepped away from her, treating the disgraced matriarch like a contagious disease. Sienna, firmly bound in handcuffs and draped in her shredded wedding dress, shrieked desperately that the security footage was heavily doctored. She wildly accused me of hiring professionals to digitally manipulate the videos, screaming until her voice cracked that it was a sophisticated setup designed to frame her. Her pathetic, frantic lies fell on completely deaf ears. The lead police officer grasped her arm with renewed authority, aggressively spinning the hysterical bride around and marching her firmly toward the grand exit. The guests parted like the Red Sea, creating a wide path of shame for the screaming woman. They openly glared at her, muttering their profound disgust as she was frog-marched out of her own lavish reception, while every single horrified eye in the opulent room remained intensely fixated on the disgraced bride being dragged away by law enforcement. A subtle, incredibly cowardly movement occurred near the floral altar. Trevor, having been released from his physical restraint by the security guards when the police intervened, recognized his brief window of opportunity. He did not rush forward to vehemently defend his screaming wife. He did not offer a single word of comfort or loudly demand a lawyer on her behalf. Instead, he slowly inched backward into the dark shadows of the heavy velvet curtains, expertly utilizing the spectacular chaotic distraction to slip silently through the kitchen service doors, cowardly abandoning Sienna to face the unforgiving wrath of the criminal justice system completely alone. The doors of the catering kitchen swung shut behind him, cutting off the blinding blue and red strobe lights of the police cruisers. Trevor exhaled a deep, ragged, frantic breath, dodging a startled busboy dropping a tray of hors d'oeuvres. He practically sprinted down the narrow, fluorescent-lit service corridor, stripping off his custom silk tie and tossing it onto a stack of dirty linens. He pushed through the exit door, bursting into the cool, damp night air of the country club's rear parking lot. The valet stand was entirely abandoned, the staff likely drawn to the commotion at the front entrance. He patted his pockets, his fingers locating the key fob for the Aston Martin he could no longer afford. He hit the unlock button, the headlights flashing twice in the darkness. A wave of pathetic relief washed over him. He had successfully evaded the police, the public humiliation, and his hysterical wife. He intended to drive straight to the airport max, out his remaining credit cards, and disappear into the Caribbean before the sun came up. He reached for the driver's side door handle, his mind already formulating a dozen different aliases. A massive, unyielding hand clamped down on his shoulder, the grip tight enough to instantly bruise bone. Trevor gasped, spinning around to face the darkness. Two men materialized from the shadows cast by the towering oak trees lining the lot. They wore impeccably tailored dark suits that barely concealed the terrifying bulk of their muscular frames. Their faces were devoid of emotion, their eyes reflecting the cold, calculating intent of apex predators cornering a wounded animal. Trevor stumbled backward, his back hitting the metal of his car, his arrogant bravado completely evaporating. The taller of the two men reached into his breast pocket, slowly withdrawing a crumpled piece of paper that looked suspiciously like a heavily overdue betting ledger. He did not yell or issue dramatic threats. He simply stated in a voice as hard as polished granite that his employers in Las Vegas were incredibly eager to discuss the $2 million Trevor had so carelessly squandered. Trevor opened his mouth to negotiate, to lie, to beg for another week, but the second man moved with terrifying, blinding speed. A heavy gloved fist drove directly into Trevor's solar plexus, instantly robbing him of all breath. Before he could register the agonizing pain, the two men seized him by the arms, lifting him entirely off the asphalt. They dragged his limp, gasping body toward a black, idling SUV parked silently at the edge of the lot, tossing him into the back seat like a worthless sack of garbage before vanishing into the night. Inside the grand ballroom, the chaotic symphony of sirens finally faded as the police cruisers sped away down the winding driveway, taking Sienna and her shattered delusions with them. The remaining high society guests began filtering out in absolute silence, eager to escape the suffocating tension and distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of my family's public destruction. The massive room emptied rapidly, leaving behind a pathetic wasteland of overturned chairs, trampled floral arrangements, and spilled champagne. Patricia remained collapsed in her velvet chair, completely isolated in the center of the ruins. The elite friends she had spent decades frantically courting had abandoned her without a single backward glance, treating her like an invisible, contagious pariah. She slowly lifted her head, her perfectly styled hair now a disheveled, chaotic mess, her expensive makeup smeared with tracks of desperate, terrified tears. Her eyes desperately scoured the empty room until they finally locked onto me. I stood calmly near the altar, Marcus, a steady, unyielding presence at my side. Patricia practically crawled out of the chair, her knees buckling as she stumbled forward. The aristocratic matriarch who had banished me from her sight mere minutes ago was entirely gone, replaced by a desperate stranger. She reached out with shaking hands, her voice cracking as she pleaded for a private conversation. She begged for a sliver of mercy, her words tumbling out in a pathetic, frantic stream of manipulation. She reminded me of my childhood, weaponizing the concept of maternal love she had never provided. She sobbed heavily, insisting that beneath all the harsh words, we shared an unbreakable bloodline. She claimed she was blinded by Sienna's manipulation, portraying herself as an innocent, naive victim of her eldest daughter's deceit. She promised to change, to attend therapy, to publicly apologize to me and my children. She sank to her knees right there on the scuffed marble floor, her expensive gown soaking up the spilled alcohol, desperately grabbing the hem of my emerald dress. She wept loudly, begging me not to take the mansion, pleading with me to remember that family is the only thing that truly matters in this harsh world. I looked down at the pathetic weeping woman clutching my dress. I felt absolutely nothing. No lingering childhood desire for her approval, no twinge of guilt, no spark of sudden miraculous forgiveness. The hollow void she had deliberately carved into my chest over 30 years was finally permanently sealed. I gently but firmly pulled the fabric of my gown from her trembling grasp, stepping back to create a physical barrier between my future and her toxic past. I maintained my absolute composure, my voice dropping to a low, icy register that completely silenced her frantic sobbing. I looked directly into her terrified, desperate eyes, stripping away the last remaining illusion she desperately clung to. Family doesn't leave 5-year-olds at Target for attention. I stated the brutal truth, echoing coldly through the cavernous, empty ballroom. Family does not protect an abuser to maintain a country club membership, and family certainly does not weaponize a child's safety for a trust fund payout. You made your choices perfectly clear decades ago, Patricia. We are done. I turned away. Marcus extended his arm. We linked arms and walked out together, leaving Patricia sitting alone amidst the ruins of the fake empire. The weeks following the catastrophic wedding reception moved with a ruthless, efficient speed. I did not grant my mother or sister a single moment to regroup or spin their lies to the local media. The destruction of their parasitic lives was spectacular and undeniably public. The criminal justice system moved with surprising velocity when presented with high-definition video evidence of child abandonment and a maliciously filed false police report. Sienna was stripped of her designer gowns, traded instead for a standard-issue county jail uniform. She faced significant prison time for child endangerment. My holding company instantly froze all family trust accounts the moment the foreclosure was executed, cutting off her access to the massive fortune she assumed was her birthright. Without my money to afford high-priced defense attorneys, Sienna relied entirely on an overworked public defender who had absolutely no patience for her shrill, demanding tantrums. Her fairy tale marriage had evaporated before they could even cut the towering wedding cake. Trevor had successfully vanished into the night, slipping past the country club security and disappearing into the murky, dangerous underworld of his massive gambling debts. He left no forwarding address, no final words of comfort, and absolutely zero financial support. He did, however, leave Sienna saddled with an overwhelming mountain of aggressive legal debt and a humiliated reputation that made her a global laughingstock. The viral video of her screaming while being handcuffed in her shredded wedding dress had cemented her status as the ultimate cautionary tale of toxic greed. She sat in a cold concrete holding cell, entirely alone, completely destitute, and finally facing the severe, unyielding consequences of her own horrific, selfish choices. Patricia's downfall was equally swift and profoundly poetic. The eviction notice I had handed her in the country club ballroom was not a hollow threat. On the exact morning the deadline expired, a fleet of private security contractors and local sheriffs arrived at the magnificent Oakwood estate. My mother was forcibly removed from the sprawling property she had ruthlessly weaponized against me for my entire life. She was allowed to take only what she could physically carry in 2 standard suitcases, leaving behind decades of illegally acquired artwork, expensive antique furniture, and the lavish remnants of her fraudulent existence. Stripped of the house, the money, and the prestige she worshipped above all else, Patricia experienced a brutal, unforgiving crash into stark reality. She was forced to move into a tiny, rundown one-bedroom apartment in a highly undesirable neighborhood completely outside her beloved city limits. The woman who had spent decades ruthlessly mocking working-class families and sneering at anyone she deemed beneath her elevated status was suddenly thrust into the exact same demographic she deeply despised. Without my hidden financial bailouts to float her extravagant lifestyle, Patricia had to face the terrifying prospect of basic survival. I received incredible, satisfying reports from former acquaintances that my mother, the former queen of the country club elite, was now actively filling out minimum wage applications for entry-level retail jobs. She was forced to swallow her immense toxic pride and beg for shift work at local department stores just to keep the electricity turned on in her dismal, cramped new reality. The absolute irony of her applying to fold the exact designer clothes she used to purchase in bulk was a masterpiece of karmic justice. I refused to absorb their toxic fallout. I completely severed all ties, ignoring the frantic begging letters my mother mailed to my office and blocking the desperate collect calls Sienna attempted to place from the county detention center. I focused entirely on my own future, surrounded by the fierce loyalty of my grandfather and the unconditional love of my children. The shadows of my past were permanently erased, leaving a bright, unobstructed path forward. But there was one final necessary act of closure required to completely cleanse the earth of their lingering poisonous memory. I stood on the pristine, manicured lawn of the Oakwood estate, the cool morning breeze carrying the distinct heavy scent of diesel fuel and churned earth. The sprawling historic mansion loomed before me, its massive white pillars and grand balconies looking oddly fragile in the harsh daylight. This house had been a gilded prison, a monument to Patricia's vanity, and a constant suffocating reminder of the conditional transactional love she had inflicted upon me. It held absolutely no warmth, no joy, and no redeeming value. I pulled the collar of my coat tighter against the wind, my eyes fixed on the massive yellow excavators and heavy demolition equipment idling in the driveway. I had not kept the estate to live in it, nor had I kept it to simply sell the historic structure to another wealthy, pretentious family. I had leveraged my ownership of the vast 20-acre property to secure a highly lucrative, transformative commercial real estate deal. I sold the highly coveted land directly to a commercial developer with an incredibly specific, ironclad contract. I raised my hand, giving a single decisive nod to the demolition foreman standing nearby. The massive diesel engines roared to life, a deafening, powerful sound that shook the very ground beneath my boots. The first heavy iron wrecking ball swung forward with terrifying, destructive momentum, crashing violently through the grand custom mahogany front doors and completely shattering the elaborate stained glass entryway. I watched with absolute profound serenity as the walls of my childhood trauma literally came tumbling down in a spectacular cloud of white dust and splintered wood. The mansion was being aggressively leveled, completely erased from the prestigious neighborhood map. In its place, the developers were contracted to build a state-of-the-art, multi-million-dollar technology hub, specifically designed for minority youth and underprivileged students. The sprawling campus would provide free coding boot camps, advanced robotics labs, and comprehensive professional mentorship programs for children who actually needed support and guidance. I watched the heavy machinery tear down the final remnants of Patricia's fake empire, replacing her monument to toxic greed with a beacon of genuine, lasting opportunity. 6 months passed with the kind of blinding, refreshing speed that only true, unburdened freedom can provide. The bitter, suffocating winter of my past had finally melted away, replaced by the vibrant, blossoming spring of my present reality. I strolled confidently across the lush, meticulously manicured green quad of my beloved HBCU alma mater. The magnificent brick buildings draped in creeping ivy and rich history stood as towering testaments to genuine achievement and hard-fought perseverance. The warm southern sun beat down comfortably on my shoulders, casting long, elegant shadows across the wide concrete pathways. I inhaled the sweet, fragrant scent of blooming magnolias, a stark, beautiful contrast to the sterile, suffocating air of the Oakwood Country Club that used to define my entire existence. My hand was wrapped securely around the small, warm fingers of my daughter Maya. She skipped lightly beside me, her bright eyes wide with innocent wonder as she took in the sprawling, bustling campus. Her joyful, uninhibited giggles echoed through the open courtyard, a pure, crystalline sound that completely washed away the lingering ghosts of Patricia's suffocating cruelty. Every step forward felt like a definitive victory march. Grandpa Marcus walked firmly on my other side, his heavy wooden cane tapping a steady rhythmic beat against the pavement. He looked incredibly sharp in a tailored charcoal gray suit, but it was his face that truly captured the profound transformation of our lives. The deep, heavy lines of stress and chronic disappointment that my mother and sister had mercilessly carved into his features were completely gone. Instead, he was positively beaming, his chest puffed out with undeniable, overflowing pride. He stopped frequently to shake hands with passing university professors and administrative staff, introducing me not as a tragic victim of family abuse, but as a brilliant, fiercely independent alumna returning to make a monumental impact. He possessed the profound, quiet peace of a patriarch who had finally secured his legacy in the right hands. He leaned down playfully, tapping Maya on the nose, drawing out another peal of delighted laughter from the little girl. We were not merely attending a generic alumni event. We were actively christening the physical manifestation of our family's absolute redemption. This moment belonged entirely to us. We approached the brand-new, state-of-the-art facility situated at the prestigious heart of the academic quadrangle. The sleek, modern architecture featured massive floor-to-ceiling glass panels that reflected the bright azure sky above. A large, expectant crowd had already gathered around the grand entrance, a diverse sea of eager students, distinguished faculty members, and local community leaders. They erupted into spontaneous, thunderous applause the absolute moment we stepped onto the elevated presentation platform. This was the Maya Marcus Scholarship Center. It was a massive multi-million-dollar endowment designed specifically to provide full-ride academic scholarships, comprehensive housing grants, and elite corporate mentorships to underprivileged minority women pursuing advanced degrees in STEM fields. I had not relied on a single dime of predatory loans or toxic family trusts to build this sanctuary. Every single brick, every cutting-edge computer lab, and every fully funded tuition check was financed entirely by the massive, highly lucrative sale of the demolished Oakwood estate and the skyrocketing profits from my own independent tech ventures. I had successfully alchemized the very foundation of my childhood trauma into a permanent, unbreakable ladder for the next generation of brilliant women. I had turned my profound pain into extraordinary, lasting power. The university president, a distinguished woman with silver hair and a commanding presence, stepped to the polished wooden podium. She delivered a deeply moving, eloquent speech, highlighting my professional journey, specifically praising my unwavering commitment to elevating marginalized voices within the corporate sector. She did not know the dark, ugly details of the familial warfare that had brought me back to this campus, but she perfectly understood the magnitude of the victory. When she finally called my name, I stepped forward to the center of the stage. A wide, thick ribbon of vibrant crimson silk was stretched tightly across the gleaming double doors of the facility. Grandpa Marcus proudly handed me a pair of oversized, gleaming silver scissors. I did not invite a small army of fake high society friends to witness this moment, nor did I need flashing cameras to validate my worth. I knelt down, carefully guiding the heavy scissors into Maya's tiny hands, placing my fingers gently over hers. Together we sliced cleanly through the center of the crimson ribbon. The crowd roared with deafening approval as the silk fell away, officially opening the doors to a future I had personally guaranteed. This was real, undeniable success. I stood back and watched the excited, ambitious students flood into the beautiful new facility, their faces illuminated by the promise of debt-free education and limitless potential. The profound sense of justice that washed over me was absolute and deeply grounding. I was completely respected by my peers, genuinely loved by the family I had actively chosen to protect, and for the first time in my entire life, I was entirely at peace. The suffocating cycle of narcissistic abuse, toxic manipulation, and cruel conditional love had been permanently violently broken. Patricia and Sienna were trapped in the miserable, impoverished prisons they had built with their own bare hands, completely erased from our brilliant reality. I looked down at little Maya, feeling the warmth of the sun on our faces. Her bright, joyous eyes looked up at me with absolute, unwavering trust. She would never know the sting of maternal rejection, the bitter taste of familial betrayal, or the desperate, clawing need to beg for a mother's basic affection. I pulled her into a tight, fierce embrace, smiling down at my beautiful daughter, knowing with absolute certainty that the Marcus legacy was finally eternally safe. We had survived the ultimate storm, emerging stronger and far more resilient than I ever thought possible. The toxic roots of my past were officially dead, allowing a breathtaking, magnificent future to finally take root and thrive.